Hello. I think we're live. Thanks for joining me. I have the great honor of taking control of the Procreate YouTube channel. My name is Max Ulichney. Um, I actually let me pause for just a second. Hey Georgia, can you mute your stream, please? I'm getting an echo. Let's see. Test test. Okay. Okay. Well, we'll try this and see how it goes. Um, Well, I guess we're gonna have some technical issues here and there, maybe. But the voice you're hearing is Georgie's of Procreate. You'll hear her asking questions from the live stream, so hopefully we can get some Q&A going as I paint. What you're seeing right now is what I'm starting with. I decided to jump ahead of the flatting process, keep it simple, so you can see um, the more important stuff as I render and work on the shading and the lighting and everything else. So I guess we'll probably just get right into it. Georgie, stop me if you want to pause on anything or anything like that, but I think we're just going to get started. Cool. Okay. So what you're looking at here is this like spy character with a nice little fancy watch. I'm just going to start showing you my layers. I've got a local color. Let's see. I'll wait for the stream to catch up just a second. There we go. Local color, lines, and I've got the watch face because I want that to glow above the lighting layers that I'm going to add. So for the meantime, I'm just going to leave that up there probably towards the end. I don't see myself changing that. Ab above the local color, I'm going to add a lighting layer. You'll see what I'm doing with that in a second. I'm going to start with a cool color. So I'm going to basically my idea is uh, he's going to be kind of like it'll be kind of a dusky sort of lighting. So I'm going to pick this nice blue. Careful not to go too blue. I'm going to have to repaint his face a little bit. I think multiplying blues on skin can be a little bit I don't know, it can go a little bit dead and flat. So you can see what I'm doing here. Oh, I have to fill it first. Excuse me. That's actually not too bad. It's always a fine line. Blue against orange has the way of kind of making people look sort of corpse-like, you know. And you can see the watch face now glowing still, which is nice. All right, so I guess I'll cut to the quick. I'm gonna clip this down. So now it's just isolated to him. And here's where we're gonna get interesting. He's gonna be standing in front of a giant explosion, the way spies do. Um, looks like I have some holes in the local color, so I'm just gonna fill that in real quick. I'm just gonna smudge some stuff together. Blend some of those edges a little bit. I like having a little bit of canvas poking through, so I don't feel like I tend to like my stuff to be a little painterly, so I don't really care that there's a bit of this going on, but I also don't want it to look like he's not solid. So there's a fine line between some of this stuff. Let's see. Actually, let me talk about the brushes real quick. I'm using the Gouache Max pack that I just released. You can see there's 53 brushes, um, including the smudge brushes, which are here. We've got some really great textural things in the smudge brushes. It's something I like to do a lot. I like to have a cleaner paintbrush typically, um, and then have a more textural smudge going on. Um, so you can see I'm using Gouache Smooth. It's one of my favorites. It's a good kind of everyday gouache brush. Let me just demo it for you real quick as long as we're at it. So you can see it's got a little bit of softness. Um, you can get nice transparency. So as you start filling things in, they have just a little bit of um, warmth to the local color if you're going to use it for stuff. It just tends to look really, I don't know, cloudy and realistic and a little bit grainy the way that gouache does. You can also turn down the opacity on the slider on the left there, and that would give you kind of more of a slightly softer, cloudier thing as if you thin down the paint. So that's a nice little way to start shading. In the meantime, I have it pretty much all the way up because I was flatting. So I want to make sure I'm, you know, keeping my stuff a little bit opaque. You can see though, my edges aren't perfect. It's something I like to do. It takes away that sort of um, overly digital look that I'm trying to avoid. The lines are colored orange and set to multiply. That's fairly standard for the way I work. I like to have a little bit of the lines poking through, and in the case of this one, um, they're pretty minimal anyway, so I'm not going to fight them too much. Um, but it is something that I tend to do, and then towards the end, I'll start flattening everything and um, painting over the lines as needed. Sometimes I'll leave maybe half of them. Another time, I'll just paint directly over. So um, there we go.
Just as a side note,
Yes,
are you wearing headphones?
I am.
Interesting. We've got a couple of people saying that the sound is a little distorted.
Oh, really? I'm hearing a bit of an echo. Let's see. Let me try something real quick. Um,
Headphones or Bluetooth?
they're corded headphones. Let's see. Let me see if I can play with that just a second. I'm hearing that too, actually. Let's see.
Let's get with us, guys. We'll see if we can get it fixed.
Can they understand me, or is it really bad?
They just said it sounded a little bit clipped, tiny bit distorted.
Oh, I think I can fix that. Is this any better? Let's see. Maybe I'll start talking and see what happens.
Someone says, I don't mind, I can still understand you.
Okay. Let me see if I can keep this going. If it stays bad, just let me know. I'll see if I can come up with something. Okay, so I've got my, or either that I'll get to painting and keep them talking to a minimum. Okay, so I've got my lighting here on a separate layer. I'm actually going to darken that a little bit. I'm going to hue saturation, so I'm going to darken that and saturate just a bit more. There we go. I'll be relying on some specular highlights on the face to define a lot of the features later, so it'll still be kind of a diffuse lighting situation. Um, and then I'm going to sample this background color, because like I said, he's standing in front of explosion like a badass. Here's a trick I like to do. By the way, how's the audio before I get super crazy?
Someone says, it's the same, just quieter.
Okay. Wow.
Let's do that. We can just cut my voice being on it, and hopefully that'll fix the quality.
Okay, let me see. Give me 1 second. Apologize. Is this any better?
Give them a second.
I can't tell.
Conflicting reports.
Okay.
Yep, yes, okay, good.
Little bit better.
Bit better.
Okay. If we need to keep working on it, I can try another thing, I think. Okay. Okay, so real quick, back to the layers. It, as I look at my stream, it's really behind.
Try not to look at the stream.
Okay.
Just keep talking.
All right, so I've got this layer 5. I'm going to name that warm light. And that'll be the backlighting that's going to define a lot of his face. So what I'm going to do with this, I'm going to fill in this color. It's going to cover everything. I don't care about that. I'm going to add a mask and invert the mask. And now I can paint on just that color. without having to color pick and go back and forth, and maybe that color can evolve accidentally if I keep repicking it. I don't want that, so I want a nice strong color to form the basis for that stuff. Okay. So now I'm just painting white, and you can see um, what that does. I'm going to turn the opacity down a bit, set it to screen. I think backlighting is something that is often more about specularity than about the diffuse light. It's not always 100%, but in the case of this, it tends to work pretty well that way. So I'm just going to go ahead and do that. Oops, let's see. Depending on the mask, got to make sure. Actually, I'm going to set that. I'm going to make that a little bit warmer. Darken it a bit. Oops. So like I said, I actually painted a little bit on that layer. Let me back up just a bit. All right, so back on the layer mask, I've got this warm light here. I'm painting white on the mask to reveal that warm light. I may switch this to normal actually, as I think about it. I'm gonna brighten this color. I'm gonna go a little bit more red. I tend to like to roll off my kind of oranges to red as they get darker. So we'll see. I'll probably adjust this again later, but this is a decent place to start. I think I like the look of that. I'm gonna turn down the line work just a little bit. Let's see. Are we getting an echo?
Yeah,
Anybody
no,
hear that?
it's not working.
My mic isn't working?
No, there we go, got it. Sorry, my
Okay.
head
Cool.
decided for a pissy fit for a second.
All right.
Okay, audio is good apparently.
Hey, good. Okay, so again, just painting white on the mask. I'm just gonna hit his shoulders and start doing things this way. I'm gonna clip this, clipping mask, back to mask painting. Cool. So this is a way I like to work. I don't always go quite as like clipping mask oriented, but I tend to like, actually this already sounds better for me too, so I think we're off in a good place. All right. Just hitting the shoulders. I have some wrinkles down here. I'll kind of come back and work on this a little bit more carefully later. For my own work, I tend to most often work really loose on this kind of same theory, but it's the same thing I usually do. Um, for things with a lot of overlap and things, you can see I'm not too careful about following the lines. I'm kind of setting up a palette that I can work into later, so I'm not really going to keep this layered the whole time. I like to start this and just give myself like a base to work from, and then I'll go back in and make more deliberate choices as I go. So I'm really just using this as a way of warming up and trying to decide the lighting and the palette. I'm gonna get a little bit of warmth on this face. I'm not really caring too much about the quality of the shading. I'm gonna blend that out with smudge tools. So back to painting the mask. I'm not gonna be at this for too long. I'm gonna move on with this and paint, start painting just as if it was traditional pretty soon. I just want to establish my basic light and dark, and then I'll move on from there. It's mostly just backlight. I don't want to get too rendered at this stage. I'm just trying to break that up a little bit. You can see that's what the smudge brush is. I actually have that mapped to my fingertip, which I enjoy quite a bit, so that it kind of works the way I work in charcoal, as if I was doing like life drawing or something. I'm just finger painting now. So I have it like basically automatically switches um, because the way I have my gesture control set up, which I quite like. Feels just very natural, exactly the way I would work traditionally. Um, Again, I'm just kind of breaking up my edges. Cool. I'm liking the look of that. we'll come back to the explosion stuff a little bit later. I just need to get that tone in there. So I think that's about where I like the overall value working. I like the fact that the white on his clothing is almost the same value as the background. Keeps things readable, but it also gives you that like simultaneous contrast that I like to play with. I'm gonna get a little bit more light on the eyes over here, and then I'll just move on. So I'm gonna start painting on top of the lines now. This is about, actually, I'll do a little bit more with, I'm gonna just do a little bit of a blush color kind of on his face. I'll map in some of the warms and cools. I'm just gonna clip that onto the local color. I'll take my opacity and turn it down, well, when I get it all laid in. This is too much, but I'll adjust this. Actually, I do not like that at all. Let's see. Yeah, that's not too bad.
We just got a picture from Rafael Cemento through Instagram. He's watching it on his big TV.
That's cool. What's up, Rafa? Let's see. I tend to like to define that lower eyelid a little bit with kind of the blush shape. It just, I don't know, it seems to be the way that people sort of get naturally tanned, and it just helps me define that in a slightly different way. I like that. I'm going to do that a little bit with the knuckles as if he's a bit of a bruiser. You know, he's been in a fight. And again, I'm just laying in tone and then smudging. It's the way I tend to work a lot. I like I mentioned earlier, I know the technical stuff has been a bit annoying, so I apologize. I'll repeat myself a little bit just to get back on track. I like to do a little bit of a smoother brush for my main paintbrush, so I'm using Gouache Smooth. As I get going, I might get into some slightly more textural stuff. I like the idea of this one being a bit smoother in the foreground and more, especially when you're wearing a tux, it's very like sharp and clean, and I think a lot of texture would look a little bit wrong for that. So I think I'll go textural in the background, and we'll keep the foreground a little bit cleaner just for some nice contrast. But then, so I'm using a little bit of a cleaner brush for the Gouache Smooth, and then I'm smudging with Gouache Bristle, which seems to be working pretty well. It's just got a little bit of grain to it. You can see there when I zoom in. Got to remember to do that since I'm all low res today. So, um, cool. All right. So I'm going to paint in some kind of ambient occlusion into my lighting. I'm going to just pick a nice dark color. I'm going to go a little bit more saturated and a little bit kind of like bluer, almost purple for the shadows. I may have to adjust this. Actually, since the shirt is white, I know I can pick that, so I'll just adjust from there. Might be a little bit aggressive, but we'll see how that goes. I'm painting directly into my lighting layer, into my shadow. Again, I'm not going to get too obsessed with how this is going. I'm just going to lay down some tone and then I'll paint back in as I go. But I definitely need a bit of a shadow under here.
All right, we got a question for you, Max, from
Yeah.
Sebastian Varela. What is ambient occlusion?
Of course. I got to check my terms. I come from CG, so ambient occlusion is kind of a CG term for it's sort of like uh, if you can imagine an object in an all-white room, those are the shadows that you get as things get closer to each other. So it's sort of just it's an abstraction of sort of bounce light and all that stuff. So basically, it's a contact shadow. I'll get kind of literal with it. There's a contact between the tie and the finger here. The finger's a little bit curled up, but you can see like just that little bit just kind of grounds the both of them. I'm going to do the same with this because I don't want a whole like super directional shadow on this. I'm going to do a bit, obviously, under his arm just to separate it and under his chin, but otherwise I'm going to keep it on the simple side. I'm not going to go as if he's like spotlit from the top or the moon or anything too literal on this. It just doesn't quite feel right for the piece. Um, but in the case of this, I'm just going to start laying in some basic value. Paying, like I said, paying special attention to kind of where things touch, just to give them a little bit of grounding so you can tell that they are related in space. He's got a little bit of that kind of like neck fold stuff going on, which I like to play with a little bit of wrinkling. I'll probably start messing with some of these colors later on. I think that's looking a little bit funny to me. I want that to be redder. Um, so I'm not going to worry about that too much.
Do you ever use your 3D models as reference, Max?
I have in the past. It's not something I do that often. I, I tend to internalize this kind of logic mostly, but I have done it like when the perspective is really crazy or um, I'm trying to get a very specific effect. I'll use it. It's not the kind of thing. It takes a lot of setup and it takes a lot to model something, of course. So it's not something I do all that often. It's a good tool in the toolbox though when the needs call for it, but it's not something I make a habit of. Um, I like painting. I like solving problems this way, so I don't tend to like get too deep into that kind of thing.
Mm.
But I think it's a great. I think like I've solved things with cubes and cylinders and kind of figured out my perspectives that way in the past, and I tend to keep it more abstract so that I'm not like just tracing on the back end of things. I think that tends to look, um, I don't know, a little bit more perfect, a little bit more resolved than I tend to like to make my stuff. I like my things to look painterly and traditional, which is partially sort of a function of the brushes that I make because, you know, I want my stuff to work as good samples for traditional looking media. Um, but it's, you know, I like to keep things brushy and interesting and textural just for the sake of like um, emulating the people whose work I enjoy. So I think that's okay. I like to put a little bit of a shadow line around the hairline just to kind of blend the two. I'll probably smudge this later on, so I'm not gonna worry too much about it. But it gives me a little bit of color variation in there. Um, I'm probably working a little bit simplified at the moment here. Like it looks a little bit cell shaded, which I don't mind a little bit, but it's just looking a little bit flat. So what I'm gonna do, um, in fact, this grain cloud is a brush that Rafa asked me to make. Um, he was in need of a kind of a big airbrush that just wasn't too flat, not too digital, so that's what I made this for. So I'm just gonna lay that in, get a little bit of a gradient. You see that on a shirt? Just round the shapes a little bit, get a little bit more um, 3D quality out of this. Cool. I'm actually gonna well, I guess I can't erase that. Let's see. I'll just sample this and paint some of that lighter blue back in. Not bad. Cool. Um, what I'm gonna do in this lighting layer, I'm gonna take. I think I mentioned I didn't like how blue this was over here. This is a multiply layer. Let me isolate this actually, so you can see. That's what that lighting layer is looking like. By the way, I love this hold to isolate thing. It's great. But that's what it's looking like against the background. So you have a little bit of shape, but I want to get a little bit of that warmth around the edges. So I took this red. I hope this is the right color. I'll adjust if I have to. But I just want to mix a little bit of this in with that grain cloud brush, just to wrap that color a little bit more. I'm not trying to get really literal with the lighting. Like I said, I want to find that a bit on the end of the process, like just as I go with actual paint, um, without worrying about all these crazy layers. So what I'll probably do in just a minute, I'm gonna flatten all this. Um, and then hope for the best. It's always a little bit of a scary moment when I flatten, but I like to kind of create problems for myself to solve, like little happy accidents, and um, it's a nice, I don't know, it leads to a more traditional looking painting, I think, when I flatten early. So I'm not worrying about edges like this. You can see how just kind of like it's a little sloppy, and I'm fine with that. Um, I find it hard to like sample when I don't know what layer I'm on and I'm using all these blend modes. So I'm going to, real quick, I'm going to soften some of this. I think that's about how far I'm going to take that foreground for a minute. So, or for this stage. So I'm going to, let's see, what do I have here? Layer empty. So I'm going to delete that. And then I will merge all of this down. So I know that's kind of scary. I think that freaks out a lot of people. For me, this is just sort of like, this scares me, having all these layers that are a little bit, I don't know, kind of abstract and digital. I like to flatten early and just trust that I can get myself out of a jam. I'm just trying to get to the point where I have my value structure set up, my colors the way I like them, and then I will flatten. So here we go. How's that? Cool. And then I will paint into this. So I'm actually going to work on top of the lines for this. One thing I do want to do, did I do something wrong with that? Something about the colors look funny. Maybe I'm okay. I still have my lines going, so I might just smudge some of this stuff a little bit more carefully. Let's see.
Michael Ralph in the comments says he flattened the madman.
It isn't the kind of thing that I recommend for a lot of people, but it's the way my process has become in Procreate, in fact. When I'm in Photoshop, I tend to work really layered, or I used to anyway, before I got into Procreate. But it was the kind of thing where I just started to get so analytical. My stuff looked stiff and it looked hard edged and kind of digital and boring. And having the ability, I love how streamlined this interface is, and I tend to enjoy um, letting the interface disappear and just sampling and painting, sampling and painting. It just gets me in touch with the process in a more natural way for me. It's not something that's for everybody, certainly. It's a little scary. I've gotten more comfortable with it.
You're freaking a lot of people out. So.
I'm sure. I'm sure. Well, it's funny because like people ask for tutorials and like this is this is hard mode to a certain extent, and I don't know that I recommend everybody do this, but I think it's if you can practice it and get better at it, I think it's worth it because it really does sort of free up your ability to just paint naturally. And I think relying on a ton of layers ends up becoming a liability at a certain stage. I think it just becomes sort of robs you of the ability to get more I don't know, improvisational. I think it makes you tentative. So I tend to like to get straight into the fun part. And for me, laying down the early stuff is kind of just a little bit tedious. It's in service of laying down a good palette. Now you can see, so the natural consequence of this is I have these kind of muddy brown gray colors in here. I'm going to select something for his eyebrows. I'll define those pretty strongly. Yeah, I might actually get a detail brush out for some of this.
So Sebastian Valero again asks, how long have you been using Procreate?
I've been using it since before my iPad Pro. I used it with a Jot Touch and a Donut Jot Touch back in the day. I've been using it since like 2013 or 14 maybe, if
Way
that's
back
right.
when.
Way back when. Um, I really enjoyed it. I was hampered by the hardware more than the software. I really enjoyed the software. I did some like lasso paintings and finger painting and stuff for a while, for a little bit, and I did like some. Um, the Jot Touch was pressure sensitive. It was a Bluetooth thing. It's okay. It did its job. It's not my favorite. Obviously, the Apple Pencil is dramatically better, and the fact that it has tilt is incredible. The especially the gesture stuff on the new one is nice. I don't always use it. Sometimes it gets in my way as I'm getting going, but I do when it works great. So sometimes I don't know, I find it a little bit finicky, but the overall result is really fun. So I'm just gonna define some dark shadow shapes here, just to like, oh, maybe I'll give them a nice hard part. Let's see. There we go. That's cool. Maybe a little too much. Actually, blend. We'll smudge it. There you go. Oop. I'm gonna get a little bit of a brighter, warmer color for the hair here. Start with this red and then just back it way down. So that's not bad.
Do you have any artists that you take inspiration from?
With this gouache pack, I was looking at some of my favorite gouache painters. I was looking at James Gurney is a really brilliant gouache and uh, casein painter. Casein is very similar to gouache. It's like a tempera kind of material, I guess. I'm not super familiar with it, but he does really beautiful landscapes and observational stuff. He also did the Dinotopia series, if anybody's familiar with that. I just enjoy his work quite a lot, and I think he was a bit of an inspiration. He has nice loose mark making and very like, um, I mean he captures light beautifully without having to um, be really literal with his mark making. He's a landscape painter, so obviously he's got to work fast, and something I enjoy. Julian Tutino Tedesco is a huge influence on some of the more like modern version of gouache painting, I guess. His texture is beautiful. His rendering is incredible. Um, he's just got a great range. I think it's something that I enjoy a lot. He seems to capture a lot of personality and gesture in his pieces that I think that's commendable. And who am I forgetting? Oh, Nathan Fowkes was a big influence on this pack. Um, his The way he treats color and stuff is just unbelievable. It's very it uses a lot of simultaneous contrast, which is kind of like I'll use it later. I'll kind of explain that better as I go. I used it a little bit, in fact, right there, but it's sort of like matching values. Here, watch this actually. So this is a trick I do a lot. I just sampled this color right here on his face. I'm just gonna make a new layer for the sake of this. I won't do this quite as explicitly later on, but this is a good example. So I use it a lot with like warm, cool, contrasting colors to give things a bit of sense of vibration and light. So what I'll do is I'm paying special attention to these swatches up at the top right of the color picker. I'm just going to swing the hue almost to the opposite. I'm going to go for kind of a warm color here. But you see how those colors are now kind of vibrating against each other? They're the same value, same brightness, and I'm aiming to get that transition next to in between them to be really, um, I don't know, to almost be hard to focus on, if you can tell what I'm trying to say. I don't know if that's maybe a funny way to say that. But now on a new layer, I'm going to paint this in there, and you can see how I'm not trying to do anything in particular, but you can see how there's just a bit of they kind of fight in an interesting way, and it gives you this warmth and energy right there. So I'll use that a little bit later. In fact, actually, you know what? What am I doing? Let's just do it now. This is something I would usually use later in the process. I use it sometimes without doing different hues. Sometimes I'll do it with different saturations. Do you see there? Where I've got a much more saturated, cooler version of the same color. I'm going to use that to just play with the skin tone. We'll see how this goes. I'm going to get something a little bit more textural. I'll try bristle gritty here. And without, you can't really even see it that well. But what it's doing is it just gives you like, it kind of livens up the skin tone, makes them look a little bit, it's probably not coming through my low res stream. I think you can kind of see it though. It just gives you a little bit of a modeling that is hard to achieve otherwise. Um, it just kind of loosens things up and makes things look a little bit more hand painted. I'll take this color into the hair too. Quite like it. I don't know. You can see he just went a little bit bluer, which I think I like. I'll play with that a little bit more. It's a little bit patchy, but I think I'll go with it. Okay. See what I'm doing too is right here, that really warm color that kind of lives in the crevice there, is something I like with skin. I think where they contact, I like to have that really saturated. It tends to look a little bit more um, like subsurface, like it gives you that soft quality, that kind of translucent quality to skin. I think that's important. Softening that a little bit. I'm gonna sample that, back it off just a little bit. So you can see I'm not totally covering my lines, but they will get largely swallowed up as I go. Actually, I'll do the eyes while I'm here. Just experimenting, see if I can turn that form so I can round out the eyelids a little bit. I think I like that. The one I do that sort of tan line thing under the lower eyelid, this like cheek shape. The problem is sometimes having a darker color under there is a little bit funny. So I tend to it sort of like makes that lower eyelid and the cheek sort of conflict sometimes. So I'll probably end up doing a little highlight in the corner of the eye to pick it out. Actually, I'm going to just do that now. See what that looks like. Yeah, that's nice. And again, I'm sort of laying down color and then blending it out. Yeah, I like that color. I'm going to put just a touch of that in the eyes. I'm not trying to like make the eyes really bright or white. Just a little contrast will go a long way. I'm going to hit that lower eyelid, not with the top eyelid color, but I'm just going to hit a little bit of a shadow. I'll do that with women, but not with men typically. I'll just define with a little bit of a softer thing. Yeah. And again, you can see I'm just kind of sampling and modifying these colors. That's all I needed that initial thing for was flexibility when I needed it, and then it just becomes a challenge for me to keep it going. Oops, what did I do? So I tend to like to flatten it just to get away from that analytical thing. Right now, you notice I haven't been in the layers that much. I'm just kind of painting as if I was painting in real life, just faster because I'm not mixing colors, not doing I'm not leaving the interface too much. It's a thing I like to do with my brushes as well. I try to um, facilitate the idea that the interface is secondary to the creative process. It's obviously important, when you're doing a really complex piece, it's important to have all of the tools at your disposal. But I think at a certain point, you end up sort of like leaving this headspace that I enjoy, this like kind of impromptu, just kind of like just go with the flow kind of aspect of things. So I don't want to remember that I'm painting digitally if I can help it. I like to just let it fall back. And well, I'm having trouble color sampling. There we go. So you can see like I've been working on one layer on top of things. So that's kind of what I'll do usually. I'll work on maybe a layer or two on top. I'll flatten that, merge down. There you go. So that's the difference of the layers. So that's just, a few minutes of painting, and I'm into that. Let me just do a quick thing on the ear, and I'll move down to the hand. I'm going to pick a really saturated color, again, kind of dark, almost the same value as that, just to give you that saturated subsurface color without going too dark. It all of a sudden just makes it look like that ear is now translucent. Soften that down just a little bit. And again, I'm not going to overfix that. I'm just going to let that be like that. I think I'll maybe just slightly darker, slightly less saturated. Let's see. Let's hit the corner of that to anchor it a little bit and then move on.
Someone wants to know if you've ever tried using Procreate Pocket on iPhone.
I have a bit. I'll be honest, it's not the I love you know this Procreate so much that it kind of escapes my memory. If I'm honest, I haven't really spent a whole lot of time playing with it, but I like it when I have played with it. I just always have my iPad on me, so it's like you know it's not as if I'm without it all that often. I think this got too dark in the corner here. The cheek. That's still a little dark. Sometimes it's a struggle to find. Yeah, see, it's all gray. Let me see if I can warm this up. There you go. So see, this is almost that same situation again, where I'm almost painting almost the same value. It's more of a color change rather than a really strict value change, which I like. Any technical issues? I know we started this a little bit goofy. Any complaints? Were we good?
Not so far. Seems to be good.
Did I just jinx myself with that? We'll see.
Please no.
Oh, you know what? Before I move on to the hands, I forgot the mouth. So, in my mind, he's got just a little bit of teeth showing. I'm gonna pick this ear color just for the corner a little bit because he's kind of close to the edge on that. So I just want to get a nice anchored kind of hot color. We get a little bit on the nose actually. Ooh, that's a little strong. Let's see. Yeah, it's still too strong.
Mr. Road in the comments wants to see your layers. Now, Mr. Road, you may have missed that little section before
Yeah.
when Max freaked everyone out. So.
Yeah, it's pretty merged. The early stage, sometimes I'll make a backup if I think I'm not 100% sold. But basically, what happened was I had local color and then a multiply of a cool color, um, and kind of just painted straight into that. I have a little bit of an edge color that I was just the same as the background color as a normal color layer, not like a multiply. Um, I tend to like to work kind of flat as soon as I'm able to. Um, it's a little bit scary, and it definitely took some getting used to. But it's in the end, it's uh, it's the way I like to work because it just gets the interface out of my head and lets me just play. I think it's not the kind of thing that's for everybody, certainly, but I think I challenged myself to do it. I've been trying to teach myself watercolor kind of before Procreate took over. And so like that sort of oh actually I could probably pick this tux color. That sort of I don't know, scary sort of permanence was something I started to like get used to. I also worked as a caricature artist for a long time, so and we worked straight into marker, and that was kind of a similar thing. We just like it's gonna be whatever it's gonna be because there's no time to fix it. And you just kind of get used to it. That sort of fatalistic thing is it's kind of freeing, even though it's a little scary. Um, so
Sorry, someone in the comments has just said, next time you merge that amount of layers, please mark the stream as not safe for work. I have children.
That's great.
Oh God.
So one thing I always make sure to do is get a nice little highlight on the nose. Um, I think that's about as far as I'm going to take that face, I think. I might come back and do a little stubble texture and things, but I think I'll probably keep it around there. Okay. We'll move down to the hand. And that's probably the most interesting part. Oh, you know, let's see, what time is it? It's 5, right? We're going for another hour, is that right?
Yeah,
Cool.
around about.
Okay. I think the hand is probably interesting to dig into. So you can see I'm looking at my layers again. I've got local color, lines, and um, let's call this rendering. Let me just show you. I'll isolate that. I mean, it looks crazy out of context, of course, but there's not a whole lot of stuff going on. It's mostly just painting around the eyes and the ears and like a little bit of color breakup. But I'm not trying to take it too far. I think it's better to keep it um, simple at that stage. Just brush around this a little bit. There you go. Just soften that transition under his eye. There's a little bit of a funny thing going on. Okay, back to the hand. Hands are always hard. Don't judge. This is kind of a funny angle, and I haven't totally worked this out before the stream, so you guys get to watch me struggle with this in real time because I'm not 100% sure how this is going to go. I'm trying to keep, so he's very square. I'll talk a little bit about the design of this. He's very square. Um, like his hair is, if you squint, it's kind of just like a thin line. It's very rectangular. He's got these, he's got this like very square kind of thing going on. You know, I want to make sure I'm trying to keep that. I even squashed his ear down a little bit so it's a little bit more linear. I think it gives him that, heroic kind of confident thing. So I'm trying to bring in some of that same shape character to his knuckles in particular and his hands. They're very like scooped and flat, and it kind of gives him a little bit of like a calloused look too that I like. Imagining him being kind of a brawler, like he's in his tux, but I mean, you can understand where he's coming from. I think it's just the kind of thing that I wanted to support with all this. So I'm trying to hit a little bit of color. I put some tone in these knuckles um, that I'm pulling from now. They're a little bit um, gray looking as I look at them now. So I'm going to try to warm those up. I like the value, so I'm just going to try something redder. Yeah, it's good. It might be a little bit strong. What I do sometimes if I'm close on a color, I'll blend it a little bit and sample that middle color. That's a little better. It was just a little bit intense. Yeah, it might still be strong. Hmm. Like I said, this is a little bit undecided, so you're watching me sort of struggle. Hands are always hard. There's never been a hand that I haven't struggled with.
I'm terrible at hands personally,
It's
and just not great at them.
the worst. One thing I definitely want to do as I'm looking at it now, I need a plane change of these knuckles, or of this side of the hand. If you think about this as a cube, I need to support that. That's already looking a little bit better. I think that might be solving some of my issue. It's catching a little bit of the explosion lights. I might uh, turn that down a little bit, but we'll see. Kind of scribbling in some tone, and I'll blend that out. Like I said, the blend or the smudge stuff is an absolute personal favorite of mine. Um, it's honestly one of the reasons I've stuck with Procreate. It's that important to me is a strong smudge, is something I never had in Photoshop. I think Photoshop smudge tool is industry worst by miles. Um, it just doesn't really work the way you expect. It doesn't feel like natural media. It tends to feel like just a weird, goofy digital thing. Um, and so I like to use it as much as possible because I just enjoy it that much in Procreate. That's pretty good. So I've kind of got like a little bit of a two plane change on that finger. I think that's working pretty well. Um, Down here, this little part of the palm is a little bit gray for me, so I'm gonna see if I can find a little bit of an in between. I'm just gonna paint just a touch of that and sample that. How's that look? Might be a little strong. Let's see. I like that. With skin, I don't like to have my shadows be too gray, too blue. I like to have just a little bit of warmth in them. It, like I think I mentioned before about just subsurface scattering and that sense of. You'll notice actually here too. My shadows always got warmer for the most part. Um, it's something that I think is sort of important. Actually, let me catch something while I'm looking at it. I'm gonna catch just a little bit of a highlight up here. That's nice. Um, cool. Moving back. I think as I render this, I might warm this transition up between the light and the dark. I might just paint a little bit red in there, but I'll come back to that later. Those are good like finishing touches kind of things, just like overlay layers and things like that. Okay, so I'm coming back to the knuckles in particular. I think that's a really difficult transition, and then the rest will sort of handle itself. So coming back to this, I'm going to sample. There's just like a nice little shadow color there that's good for darker. Oop, it's a little gross actually. Warm it up just a little bit. It's always a little bit hard out of context to pick that exact right color, especially when I'm sort of in this like muddy blue, gray, brown area. It's never easy to tell exactly what's going to look like what, because saturation has a huge amount to do with it. I think I'll be okay with that. Let's see. All right, I'm gonna paint a little bit of the background in on this too. So this is where working flat is kind of brilliant because I don't care what layer I'm on. I'm just gonna paint. It's something that I really like to do because it starts to look like a traditional painting. When your strokes sort of mirror the direction of the stuff around it, that's when it starts to look really realistic. And you get these great transitions that you just can't really easily get without sort of faking it after the fact. I just really enjoy some of that um, imperfect, blended, visible stroke kind of stuff that I think is something that's I try to make a little bit of a hallmark of mine. Ooh, too much. There you go. See how those shadows are warm? Skin has a lot of um, specularity, and so like it gets, I think, cooler as it gets brighter. The way I like to paint a lot of times, not always, but it's a common thing you'll see as I work. Um, I tend to enjoy that. It, especially in a situation like this with cool light. I think warm shadows gives you that living quality. This is a little bit too blue for me. Ah, it's still very purple. It's so funny. Like when you're playing in these colors, they're so sensitive. They're so sensitive. I don't love that. See, that's like too brown. God, this is killing me. All right, let's see. I'll see if I can sample something from somewhere else. I think I liked what this was. Oh my God, you guys. I told you I'd struggle. Are you enjoying this? Is it fun to watch me struggle?
Jamie in the comments wants to know if you're still putting out tutorials.
Planning on it. I'm in conversations with something. They're still happening. I'm not sure where they're going to come out now. I just had a conversation with someone about maybe hosting them not on Gumroad where I host my brushes. So we'll see. I'm undecided yet, but I kind of like this idea. So I just have to marinate on it a little bit. But they are definitely coming. Um, Part of this will, of course, determine like how the material in them and the curriculum and things like that. So I'm not entirely settled on what I'm going to end up having in them, but or the structure of it. But they are coming. They are something that are important to me. I definitely want to put out tutorials for sure. There we go. I wanted to get a little bit of that. I'm going to give him kind of a bony knuckle here. Again, sort of that like brawler kind of thing. Sometimes it's a fun little shape to include. What is going on? Oh, okay. I'm on below my lines. There it is. Sometimes I'll bring my lines back to the foreground just so I can reestablish um, the breaks between the fingers, things like that. I do. I don't usually paint over them quite so aggressively as I did just then. So I'll bring those back down. Now I know where they are. So I'm gonna, I hope I'm not gonna regret this, but I'm gonna merge. Eh, I don't know, maybe not. I wanted to smudge this down here, but I don't like having to jump between layers too much. So I'm just gonna do it up here. Just gonna sample those colors and paint. I'm gonna give them a little bit of veining too, just something kind of makes them a little bit more muscular. You can kind of see there that's sort of simultaneous contrast, that intense color that's the same value as the shadow around it. It sort of just vibrates. When you zoom out, it just feels like light. You can't really see it that well, but it tends to give you that um, just a nice quality that I include in a lot of my paintings. I think with skin, it's good to have a lot of warm and cool. You can see his knuckles are all kind of all over the place. Um, I'm not trying to be too deliberate. I'm focusing more about the value than the um, than the color of these shadows. It's nice to vary it up a little bit. They're a little bit patchy. I'll come back and smudge some of that stuff back together. Right now, I'm sort of just experimenting and establishing my tones. By the way, as I'm talking, I realize I repeat myself a lot. Like tend. I use tend a lot, and that bothers me. Tend to. I don't know. I don't know where that
I
came from.
notice this sort of stuff when I'm filming like Instagram tutorials and things.
Yeah.
I have to redo takes so many times. Like, oh, I've said that so much.
Oh man, I do it all the time. That one, I tend to say tend to too much, is in fact. But it kills me because I just do it subconsciously.
My go-to is let's take a look at
Yep.
tutorials. We're always let's looking at things, so much.
Yeah. I just get so self-conscious. Especially I'm a little bit on autopilot. I'm more concentrating on the art too, so it's like my mouth is just doing whatever it wants to do. Yeah, those knuckles are a little bit goofy at the moment. I'm not sure. I mean, look, this is the reality of painting, right? Like you guys get to see me struggle, which is something I actually enjoy. I like to um, be transparent about process as much as I can. I like to talk about struggles. I like to not pretend that artists are machines. I think it's too easy for people to assume that just because you see this like nice finished art on Instagram or whatever, that it was just like this simple process, and it almost never is. You just get that sense of it. It's like that kind of like Instagram life version of things where like um, you're just having gorgeous Instagram worthy brunches every day, and it's like it's not just not the way life is, and that's not the way creation process is. It's nice to I think fight against that. This is still work. This is hard. Like I'm not loving exactly where this is right now. I don't hate it. It's gonna get polished, but it's not as good as the face. It's also like I like working anatomy into pieces. I like having that sense of um, musculature in the hand and things, but it's hard to find a pleasing balance between that and a cartoony face sometimes. I think that's a nice contrast. I like the slick, polished exterior of his face and that sort of like muscly, businessy kind of hand. I think that's kind of a cool contrast for a character like this. He is about two things. He is, he's hiding a truth about himself. I think that's really cool. But it also means that like now I'm sort of biting off a lot, trying to balance two styles that don't really want to merge easily. Those highlights helped a bit. This is probably something I'll just mess with forever, but there's also a thing of like I just don't want to overwork it. I like my stuff to look like a painting. I don't want to just make my stuff look incredibly zoomed in and polished flawlessly. I think it's important to me to have like brush size discipline and keeping my strokes kind of big. I like it being a little bit impressionistic like that. I think that's kind of cool. I think more than that, and I'm going to start to get away from. Uh, it'll start to look digital and flawless, and I think that kind of bores me, I guess. So I think he's got a little bit too much line down here, so I'm going to back a little bit of that off.
They're enjoying watching you struggle.
Good, good. Thanks. Appreciate that. No, but I think it's I like showing that. I don't want to come across as if like these things arrive fully baked. This is hard. This is real hard. Like hands are hard.
I
They're
think
always
it's
hard.
really important too, to kind of have that grounding when you're surrounded by everything on social media. It can be really overwhelming, especially for new and aspiring artists.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think
My
it's
God, I feel like I'll never be able to do that. Well, I mean, this person's been working in the industry for so many years and they still struggle. So
absolutely. I think it's so important to be able to talk about that and not pretend like we're perfect.
yeah,
I'm trying a little bit of a brighter light on that. I don't know if I like that. I don't hate it, but it's a little bit funny. What do you think? I don't know. I'm not sure. I'm not sure. Yeah. I'll take another look at that as I get closer to finish. Let's see, I got 45 minutes left. Actually, that was a fast hand. Like I said, I'm not 100% done, but that's good enough for now, I think. I mentioned brush size discipline. I think that's something I enjoy a lot. I don't want to fix all of my problems perfectly. Um, I'll go smaller, tighter around the face, but I tend to like let things soften towards the background or as you get away from the focal point. It's something you'll see. By the way, make no mistake, I am not comparing myself, but it's something you'll see in like a Sargent painting or like John Singer Sargent or people like him. It's really common um, to um, have the focal point be the most kind of in focus and tightest and most detailed, and then let the things around that sort of fall away. I think that's an effect I really enjoy, and it's where I got the idea for those effects. I mean, I think part of it is like you could render every molecule of this thing, but it's like, does it make it better? I think it's more attractive if it looks kind of like a painting. I like paintings. I like looking at paintings. Why not make it look like a painting? Just adding some little highlights here. As I zoomed out, I was starting to like want to get a little bit more. That's a little too much. A little bit goes a long way on things like that. Oh, here, okay. This is a great place for simultaneous contrast. So I'm going to sample the ear. See that? I'm going to come up to my color picker and I'll swing it around to blue. And without having to do too much, the hues do adjust the value a little bit, so I have to readjust a little bit. But I'm going to pick that blue where it sort of vibrates with that red. And so I'm going to make a new layer because I'm not sure if I'm going to like this 100%, but just that little bit sort of gives it a little bit of like um, it's a little strong, a little bit sharp, but I like what that's doing because it makes it feel like it's catching the same light as he is, but it's not obliterating that subsurface. It's a little bit dark. I'm just going to brighten it up slightly. There it is. Again, I'm trying to match the value. Like if you zoomed in on that, you wouldn't say that it's like super specific. It's really loose. I like that. I think it's important to allow things to be loose. Your brain will fill in the rest. So I'm gonna define his lower chin a little bit. Again, going for kind of a warm color. I don't want to go cool, even though, it's the classic like cool shadows instinct. I don't think that's bad, but it's oversimplified. Give that a little bit of red, because that's going to be right where that explosion wraps around. Maybe we should get into the explosion, huh? Is that maybe the right way to go from here?
I'm excited.
Yeah, okay. I was gonna do the watch and I'm like, what am I playing at? Let's do the explosion. Okay. So my background is good enough. I've got to make a layer under this. Okay. I'll be honest, I haven't really mapped out my plan for this too dramatically, but I think we'll figure it out together. So I have these colors that I sampled. They're probably a little oversimplified. I will adjust this as we go, but right now I want to establish a nice, strong blast. I'm going to use some of my crazier brushes because, why the heck not? The gutter punk brushes are really fun. These dry brushes are going to come into play probably. Uh, these three ratty ones are some of my favorites. I made a few of my recent pieces mostly with those. Um, they're really good for, let's see, yeah, for just sort of like pushing around sort of like impressionistic sort of effects. It's the wrong color, so I'll back out of that. But I guess we're going to figure this out together. I don't really know how I'm going to define this, but I want to make sure that my fire is more chaotic and organic shaped. He's very strong, very square, very geometric. This fireball should be much more, um, much less defined, much rounder too. I think maybe a little bit angular because it kind of feels um, like it wants to be a contrast from him. So I might play with some things. You know what? I'm going to back on this. I'm going to go up. I'm going to see if I can frame him nicely with kind of an effect like this. Yeah, that's cool. Looks a little bit more heroic. So I'm tapping. You can get some decent uh, textures this way. I'm going to smudge these around, but sometimes it's nice just to have a little bit of a kind of a sponge painting effect here and there. Any questions as I'm just getting really loose with this stuff?
No, just enjoying watching, I think.
Cool. This would be a great time because I'm just sort of like just feeling it out right now. I don't really know what I'm doing. So I want to make sure I have a little bit of like an edge defined, in a couple places, just like where the leading edge is peeking in, because I think it's nice to. I'm gonna undo that a little bit. Kind of define layers of the shape. Oh, that might be framing him too much. Okay, let's see. It was kind of doing this, which just looks like it's echoing his shape, so I'm gonna try something different. It's good to have a little bit of overlap, you know. Things like that are cool. It's always nice to like avoid. That's not really exactly a tangent, but it's sort of echoing the shape and it associates the two, which is not what you really want. Like wherever you can contrast the shape or avoid, immediate and obvious overlaps, that's preferable. That's not bad. This is going in an okay spot. Cool. See, it's coming alive. It's starting to get a little bit of context for this. Um, let's see. Let me pull in some other weird brushes. Gutter punk. So gutter punk is really fun. I don't get to use this as often as I'd like, but man, is it enjoyable. I'm going to do something weird. I'm going to see if I can mix a little bit of cool color into this. I'm going to do this on a new layer because I'm not 100% sure if I'm going to like this, but ooh, it's tiny. Again, I kind of like to create problems for myself a little bit. I'll probably, I don't know if I like that, but I'll probably like overlap that, but those little bits of extra stuff kind of like just makes it feel like maybe debris or I don't know. I'm not going to think too hard about it. So Gutter Punk was designed specifically for like weirdo background things, concept art, um, anything that like trees. It's really good for trees and foliage. For it's one of those things you just I mentioned Nathan Fowkes and James Gurney, and they have these like old ratty brushes that they'll break out. They have their stuff is full of texture, and it gives you so much um, sort of implied information without actually rendering it all, and it's just brilliant. I love that stuff. Okay, let's see here. I think I need some hot middle colors. Yeah. Ooh, I know what I'll do later. I'm gonna break out my comics pack a little bit for this. I have some good rake brushes in there that I enjoy a lot. I'll mix some of those in. But you can see this is I guess I have to remember I'm low res on this. I'm getting some really nice dry brush effects in this. I'm just going for just general texture. I'll probably blend this a lot, but I want to make sure this is grainier and a little bit more raw than the foreground anyway. I also want to make sure I'm not losing that sort of directional blast, so I'll probably layer into that, or maybe use that with smudge. Maybe smudge is the way to go. Let's see here. Let me try something. I think I need that background color back. I'm gonna flatten all this background. So you can't see, but I just filled a layer because it's the same color as the background layer. And I'm gonna merge all these. There you go. Oh, what did I do? Okay, there it is. So now that's all in one layer, and I can smudge those, and we'll just see what happens. I think I'll probably smudge and then paint into it so there's a little bit more structure. What do I have out here? Smudge Thrashed is my current favorite. I like that one a lot. It's I was looking at Julian Totino Tedesco's work, um, and he uses smudge with a lot of texture, usually sort of as a finishing touch on his things. But this one was inspired by one of his. I think he uses. I don't know. I'm not entirely clear on what he uses for some of this stuff, but the I was just going for some like nice, big uh, textural stuff for this. So you can see I'm trying to get back to that sort of ray effect, like that directional sort of thing. I'm gonna go both ways too on this, so I'm gonna like go in and out in this. Trying to pick up, yeah, there it is, that darker color. And you can see the blue is sort of getting overwhelmed a little bit, but I'm okay with that. I'll come back to that if I want to reestablish it. I don't know if I need to though. I'm trying to, I want to melt this shape above his head. It's a little too noticeable. Trying to get too much texture away from his face a little bit because I think it's, I want to make sure his face is the most detailed thing in the piece. What do you think? That's not bad. Let me try something. So I'm going to make a new layer. I'm going to pick a nice saturated light color. This looks pretty good. Drag it in, fill it, and I'm going to multiply this. Ooh, that's really strong. Let me try something a little bit more pale. It's probably too much, but I'm not done with this experiment yet. So I'm going to make a new layer. I'm going to pick kind of a cool dark red, and I'm going to screen this or add it. We'll see which one works better. Let's try add. I think I like screen. I'm going to back off. Where is it? Where'd it go? I'm going to back off on this little guy. But what this does, this is a technique I'll use at the end as well. I like to multiply and screen color layers to give it kind of like it, the oversimplified version understanding of it is kind of like an Instagram filter effect. It just sort of gives it a color wash. Let me group these so you can see. It just sort of combines the layers a little bit and I don't know. It sort of melts them together so the color relationship is a little bit stronger. I think that's decent. So what I'm seeing now is his rim light is kind of a little bit melting into the background, so I want to get a bit of a hotter color behind him. So on a new layer, I'm going to pick a good saturated color. I'm going to set it to maybe I'll just work normal. Get my gutter punk back out. We'll see if this works. Might be too much. I don't want to overwhelm the texture I have in here, but I definitely want to like give him a little bit more of a halo that pops him off the background. I will paint back into his rim light to pop him off more, but I want the core right behind him to pop just a little stronger. Let's see with this group back on. I think this is maybe too much. I think this is just a little strong. It's subtle, but I think it just gives you that heat. I don't know if you can see that well on the stream, but I think I'm liking it on. So one thing we need too is debris. So I'm going to pick a dark red color. I don't want to make this too specific. I just want to give it a little bit of structure. So let's see if this looks good. Ooh, what else can I use? Wash shredded maybe? Ooh, that's what I'll do. Okay. I'm going to line it up on that leading edge. That's what I'll do. I like that. Okay. So I'm going to help define. I was just thinking I want to get some structure back into this. I kind of like that leading edge being the main sort of debris focal point. So I can then add a little bit of these little chunks to give it structure again. I'm not thinking about this too literally. I think it's a nice way of just supporting the colors that already exist and the structure of these things, and it makes it look a little bit more hand painted rather than um, just a bunch of random paint. I'm gonna keep it a little bit away from the ear. I think it's just getting a little close to him. You see what I mean about the structure, though, I think. It just keeps those layers intact. That's not bad. And then I'll come back and just smudge those a little bit. I don't like to have brush strokes, especially in something like that that's too raw. So I'm just gonna like just loosen these up a little bit. I'm just kind of like running through these with the what is that, smudge thrashed. Oops. Just to take the edge off. Some of them were just looking a little bit opaque, a little bit obvious. Cool. All right, let me before I run out of time, I'm gonna do a rim light for our hero. I'm gonna start merging some of these layers back down. So that's the hand layer I just merged, the hand rendering.
More merging. No.
Like everything was on normal, so it's not like too crazy. When it comes to like the funny blend modes and things, that's definitely a lot more risky. In this case, it's just a bunch of like adjustments and things that I was goofing on. Let's see, what do I have at the top here? I don't remember what this layer is. What are you? Layer empty. Okay. So this is gonna be my rim light layer. Um, for rim lights, I actually don't like to paint additive or anything too often. I'm gonna pick a nice saturated bright color. I think that's pretty good. You'll notice my edges are still a bit hairy in places. They're just a little bit loose, a little bit impressionistic. I still got pencil poking through. Like you've got this little edge. You got this little dark edge on his neck that I want to get rid of. And same on the right side of his face. Just it's dark where it should be light, right? So I'm gonna come back in here and just start painting in this bright color, and you can see around where his wrist is. It's just or like the watch transition. That's a lot of layers of material. I'm not going to over break that up, but I do want to like just cut into that a little bit. I'm going to do that with paint. I'm not going to try to get too much in the way of like erasing or layered up stuff like that. I'm just going to paint over it. It's the freedom that, as scary as it is, working kind of flat. Like I know I say I work kind of flat, and I do, but like for me, this is sort of flat. I'm not doing a whole lot of like, I could happily flatten that rendering layer because I'm never going to come back to that local color stuff again. Whatever's the merged version that's called local color. I don't usually merge my lines typically, because sometimes as you paint the the lines will get lost and you just want to re-reference those. So I'll usually at least back them up if I'm going to flatten them. All right, so I'll do rim light. Let's call it rim light. I'm not always this organized. I try to be, but it doesn't always happen. Okay. Rim lights. I'm going to pick a detail brush, probably. Detail bristle. I like that one. Cool. That's what I did the eyebrows with, and it gives you just a little bit of a focal point. Like when everything else is a little bit sketchy, this is a nice one to finish it off with because it feels like you're all of a sudden in focus, which is nice. But it's not overly clean, this brush. It's got a little bit of texture to it. Clean up the tip of the nose.
Someone says, please tell us this is your self-portrait.
Don't I wish. I don't hang out in front of explosions enough. So I'm paying attention to like get rid of this this dark edge. I don't need to like get rid of it entirely, but I do want to like, I don't know, just reference it a little bit and clean up. Oops. I think what I'll do down here, I don't mind it being present. I think it's just a little bit dark. I'm gonna pick a warmer, darker color, slightly. Grab that orange. Yeah, that's cool. I like having it roll off to a different color. This this brush has a little bit of texture to it, so it doesn't always exactly land where you expect, but I like that. There you go. I'll break up some of these edges. I don't like the color to be too perfect. I'm zooming in probably a little bit more than I usually would for the sake of this low-res stream. I apologize. I'm just having some technical problems that seem to fix. But I'm trying to keep it zoomed in so you guys can see what I'm trying to get at. Ooh, too much. Oh, actually, I'm going to redo that. See this right here? So that's a nice light kind of yellow color over a dark color, and it's that transition that's killing me right now. Do you see how like when it's transparent, it looks muddy and brown and gray? I don't like that. So what I'd rather do, and that like there is a, I don't mind it terribly in the sake of making it look painterly. I think that actually looks kind of realistic, but artistically, I don't like having something that's supposed to be describing light and warmth and fire to be too gray. So I'm always making sure that as it gets darker, it's getting warmer, it's getting more saturated actually. Um, I'm not terribly afraid of it. I don't, but I just want to make sure that that feels better because it's going warmer as it gets darker. There's a little bit of grayness and stuff in here that I'll probably paint a little bit into, but I'm not. Again, I'm not trying to hide the fact this is a painting. In fact, I want to celebrate it. So little things like that don't bother me. Oops, what did I just do? So I'm sampling from this a little bit. I wanted to get some of the like more saturated blue. It's a nice little saturated thing in there that I want to grab. Oops. try to get a nice little bright blue hit there. But because that hair is so dark, a little bit goes a long way. Cool. Just gives him that shiny, coiffed look. Where was I? Edge light. So, rim light. We got this here. I'm just gonna make sure I like hit the edges. I like to do a little bit of like loose um, flyaways. Kind of makes it feel like he's a little bit in the wind of this thing. Pick. Ooh, too much. Man. All right, I'm gonna turn the opacity down on this. That's not bad. I'm just kind of throwing a couple of strokes here and there. It just makes it feel a little bit more like light if it's just picking up in places. Try not to overdo that, but it's nice in a reflective kind of thing like hair sort of is. Okay. Back to the normal stuff. So where was that color? I'm always trying to sample from the original area if I'm able to. Sometimes I lose it. Sometimes it evolves, as you go. I'm going to keep the brightest rim light on the right side of his face. I don't mind the back of this falling off a little bit. It's too much on his ear. I do want it to overlap his hair just a little bit though. Just have to find the right amount. That's good. Again, I'm not trying to overly clean that. It feels energetic the way I have it, so I don't mind. I'm just gonna reference those wrinkles a little bit. Pass. I don't like that. It's probably giving people anxiety how loose I'm leaving that. But I think it's that like it's when you zoom out, it looks fine. Maybe it's actually as I say that it's bothering me now, so I'll fix that just a little bit. It was going like light and dark and light again. I'm kind of going for more of an impression though than I am an actual like perfect edge. There you go. Used quick line for that just to get a little bit of a nice clean um, razor sharp sort of edge. I don't want it everywhere though. Actually, as it rolls away from the face, I'm going to start using this darker color. And then here, I'm going to branch off. I'm going to start painting. Actually, okay, this is going to be nice. I'm going to get a little bit of this bounce light under here. I'm going to blend those colors a little bit. I want to get some warmth back into this blue because it starts to look a little bit digital. If it's just a hard swath of blue right there, it starts to get a little bit of that bounce light from his neck and just gets away from that perfect. It's a really intense blue too, so it's a little bit aggressive. That's better. See what that did? I'm gonna turn that off. That's nice. I'm not gonna do that everywhere, but I do think that blue is a little aggressive, so I'm gonna do that in a few other spots. The other thing I like about this is it's a hue change and not a value change for the shadows, and it helps reference this hand a little bit to connect the two. Again, I'm going to blend that a little bit, so I'm going a little overly aggressive, knowing that when I blend it, it's going to lose a little bit of that strength. Actually, I'm going to do that again. Cool.
Someone here has said, are you using your fingers or an Apple Pencil? And I think I heard you mention before that you use both in different situations.
I do. In the case of where I need something a little bit more controlled, I'll use the pencil for the smudge. But typically, I'll use my finger. Like when I'm being a little bit more loose and blendy, and I don't need to reference an edge too carefully, I'll use my finger. And then when I'm kind of like in those transitions, I was getting a little bit more detailed. In those cases, I was mostly around. I was using the pencil. That is. Right here, I'm using my finger just to clean up that corner a little bit. Oh, one tip I have for that: when I'm using the smudge tool, um, I'll try to make that icon on the left there about the size of my finger, so that when I put my smudge down, it roughly matches the size, so I get something kind of predictable. I just switched to the pencil. I just needed to um, have a little bit more fine control. The fingertip thing just doesn't have the same pressure sensitivity, so if I'm just like breaking an edge up, I don't care. But if I need to like blend something a little bit more carefully, I'll use the pencil. But it's nice to have the ability to switch between. So come back down here, gonna fill in that little hole. I don't think I need the warmth down here. I think I've played with it decently, but I'm gonna break it up since I have that warmth elsewhere. Oops, a little bit bright. And you notice, by the way, this is like a purple. It's not the kind of color you'd imagine it to be necessarily. Um, it makes sense, when things roll off between warm and cool, but you wouldn't call that purple necessarily. Like, I don't think of that as purple. Ooh, shoot, I'm on the wrong layer. No problem. Happens to the best of us. So I'm gonna smudge that down there. Smudge it up here. I don't even know what layer I put that in. I hope that was the hand layer. Cool. Is that the rim? I have no idea anymore. I don't know what's happening. What day is it? What's happening? I'm lost. I don't mind that being a little bit impressionistic. It's probably a little bit more than I need at the moment. At a certain point, though, I will come back to the very top layer and fix all that. I guess I could do that on the rim light layer. Let's do that. Actually, so I've got a little bit of a wrinkle in this shirt now that I kind of like. That little implied fold kind of effect is something I'm responding to. So I'm going to copy that over here because I just think it looks nice. Just a little bit of breakup, just a little bit too clean over there. So I'm just going to, and it seems too random, but I think it'll give me the value I need to just give it a little extra something. I try to think in shapes too, so I'm not just like adding random wrinkle. I'm trying to like give it just a little bit of structure also, that little bit of zigzag. It's kind of a nice touch. Hope it's not too much. I don't know. I think it's okay. Sure. I think just anything to break this up at this stage is good. This is getting a little bit noisy in here. I'm probably worrying about boring stuff for the stream, I suppose. I'll get back to the fun stuff in a sec. But this is the process for me. This is a lot of jumping around at a certain stage. And because it's flat, I don't have to think about where I'm at. I can just spend my time where I want to spend it. That's not bad. Okay, back to the rim light. I know I keep saying that, but I'm actually doing it this time. How are we doing on time? Let's see. Not bad.
Yeah, we'll do that.
Maybe I will. I'm gonna do something. Maybe I won't fully finish this rim light. I'm gonna want to do something before I wrap that up. I think I'll have time to get back to it, but I want to get a little highlight on this like satin. Oh, actually, I like that color. I'm gonna render this bow just a little bit. And I think that's good. The darker things are, I think the more you can sort of just fudge around and not have to worry too much about um, rendering it flawlessly. Like I could make that more careful, but it's like, what's it gonna give me? I don't know if it's gonna make anything better. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take this the sort of shoulder color. I'm gonna make it brighter and bluer. I'm not going for like a really bright color. I'm gonna make this on its own layer. I'm gonna give it a little bit of satin sheen on the lapel here. This is a place where I'd really want to think about the shape of this. So that it has just a little bit of that like wrinkle Gives it a little bit of structure. Probably follow that line up. Cool. Oops. I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna pick that color for this a little bit. I'm gonna hit just a little bit of that bow because that's also theoretically probably a similar sort of satiny material, kind of like a tie would be. Um, just that little highlight, all of a sudden, like you can see how loose that is. But I think it's really working as you get out here because that's not where your eye is. There's so much contrast in his face. There's so much contrast in the overall piece that because if you squint, it's one value. I'm making sure to group my values really carefully, um, so that like this highlight on this lapel isn't overpowering anything else. It's sort of just serving the overall impression of a highlight. And you can see just like quickly laying down a little bit of tone and smudging. I mean, look at that. That's really nice. Like that's such a nice little um, warm detail. And when you zoom out, you don't really care about the shape of it, but it just sort of works, you know? Okay, so it's shaping up decent. I probably will polish up the hand a little bit as I wrap up. Um, Brush. What am I doing? Let's see. Anybody have any questions?
No questions coming through really yet.
So they're just not engaged. I see. I see how it is.
They're just enjoying watching.
So for the watch, I'm gonna do a little bit of like metal rendering. That's why I included it to begin with. I'm gonna do this just in the last couple of minutes. I'm not gonna get too crazy with it. But before I go too far, I'm gonna flatten these hand and rim light things. Really, this is more of a rendering layer. Um, oops. You can see it's just sort of tightening up details, reestablishing forms. I'm gonna hit that rim light a little bit on his hand, and then especially around the knuckle. Kind of hit it right where it feels like you'd need a little, like kind of implying a fingernail over there, and then just letting it roll off. This is like a canvas watch strap of some kind, so I'm just going to give it a little bit of extra like transition stuff here, just to ground it a little bit. I'm going to hit this shadow color under the watch, again grounding it. You can kind of see I've got this like warm peach color in the shadows, and then this cooler. It's really kind of a two-tone effect with a little bit of breakup in between. So anytime I'm hitting that shadow color, I'm just, you know, picking that same one or a variation of it. I'm not trying to pick the same color exactly. I like it being a little bit different each time, but it's nice that it's got a little bit of breakup. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick some of this fire color here on the watch. What layer am I on? Yep, wrong layer. Caught it just in time. All right, one more. My watch is a little bit out of round as I look at it now. So something about as I was rendering it, kind of like I lost my line work or something. I don't need to make that perfect. I like it a little bit impressionistic, but you know, there's a limit. So I'm gonna pick. I'm gonna do that. Let's see what that looks like. I'm just gonna hit a hot side. I'm not trying to like get all the way up to um, the hot highlight, but I do want to like establish a little bit of a breakup. I'm gonna pick my shirt color over here, so it references some of that. I'm gonna actually, I'm thinking of this as a kind of like an inverted bezel too. So I'm gonna pick this. Basically, when I do metal, I like to sample from the environment that's around as much as I'm able to. So it feels like it's of a piece. But I'm not gonna take this too far because I don't want to like drown in watch detail. So I'm gonna hit a couple easy highlights, and I think this is gonna be enough. So in fact, I'm gonna get a darker, warmer color. Let's see, what do I want? That's nice, I think. Yeah, I'm gonna blend that a little bit. I like it being a little bit, again, kind of brush size discipline is something I'm thinking about right now. I don't want to go um, too tight to the point where it feels digital and gross. Um, and I like to let my highlights kind of overlap things a little bit, let them get a little bit big so they kind of feel like they're glowing a little. See that? I think it's enough. Um, I am going to paint a little bit of this red. I'm going to pick a version of this red and make it much darker and warmer, just to make it feel like it's glowing in that watch face.
Chocolate Milk in the comments here says, do you have any tips for people starting out with Procreate?
That's a good question. One thing that helped me a lot is reading the manual. I know that's lame. That's not what people want to hear. There's so much good information in that manual and so many like brilliant little hotkeys and like or like gestures and things that are just not to be that you would never find on your own if you didn't know they were there. It's definitely the number one advice I would give you. Um, it's not again like the sexy advice. I think honestly, it's familiarity. I think just like anything, I think you need to just work with it a lot. Um, but I think in terms of Procreate, I think it's just like I think brushes help. I like me. I believe in the value of good tools. But I don't think that's all there is. I think there's a lot more that plays a part in this, and I think honestly, just typical drawing skills are going to take you a long, long way. But I think in terms of Procreate, I think like embrace what it's good at and don't try to force it to be other things. I think if you're trying to work super duper layered and technical, I think the strength of this program for me is in the sort of impromptu, brilliant, the way the interface disappears, the way it kind of gets you back into a more pure sort of like at least what it's done for me is it's gotten me back into a mode of thinking that's less literal and less analytical. So for me, I'd say like don't try to just hammer on layers and layers and layers. I like to do, by the way, as I'm doing this, I'm doing a glow layer, so I have it on screen and I'm just picking a really hard red color. I'm just gonna give it a little bit of a, as we're wrapping up the stream, I've only got a few minutes left. I just want to get some of that in there. But I think like embrace what the program's good at, um, lean into it. I think the more improvisational you get, the better it responds, personally. So I'm just doing a little bit of glow, just to, like wrap around some warmth along his shoulders. It's probably a little bit more rendering I would do around the arms, but maybe not. Maybe I'm good. So let me do one quick thing. I'll show you my finishing touches thing. I kind of did it on the fire, you'll see. But I like to multiply uh, a color and then screen a color to finish things off. In this case, I'm going to multiply a little bit of a cool color because he's cool, and so I want to see how this goes. I'm not sure if this is going to work the way I want. I'm going to multiply, and then I'm going to make a new color, a new layer with a dark red, maybe a little bit. Well, let's see what red looks like. I'm going to screen this. It's a little bit too much, but I like what it does. It kind of like gives you a little bit of haze in the frame. Now let me group these so you can see. I don't know about that. Let's see, I might make this yellow. So I'm hue shifting the that warm yellow color. I'm gonna lighten it just a little bit. So I think it's kind of like a, I'm not sure about that. I might leave that off actually. But I do like that little bit of a red glow. I think that's working pretty well. I think that's probably about it, right? Is that are we coming up against the end of the stream? Do we want to do more? Or how's everybody feeling?
If you want to do a little bit more, you're welcome to.
Cool.
Everyone watching, do you want to see more Max? Just give him a second to hear that.
Sure. Because I can get into a little bit of detailing, but I'm pretty close.
Yes, more Max.
I should have figured. Okay, so let's. I do like to do these like kind of effects layers. Actually, let me put some grain on this while I'm thinking about it. Um, I'll pick a middle, like a 50% gray. Actually, I'll show you how I make that. If you come up to value, I'm just looking for 50% gray right there. The reason that's important is for the overlay color, overlay layer blend mode. Oop, got it. I'm going to fill that, set it to overlay. I'm going to zoom way in because, like I said, this is kind of a low res stream. I apologize for that. Um, and then, what am I doing? Let's see. I'm going to add noise to it. Can you see that well enough on stream? Yeah, that's okay. For grain, I usually turn my saturation down by, I don't know, a third or a half or something. And then I'll blur this, a little Gaussian blur, just a little bit. I'm trying to reference like as if it's somewhere between film grain and paper grain. I'm not thinking too hard about it. And then I'll turn down my opacity slider. I usually go like probably around 20%. Depends on what I'm trying to do. I think that looks pretty good. This is sort of a filmic um, scene, so I think it's okay to be a little bit grainy. Let's see. Um, so I do like to have that color layer in there. Let me try something actually. I might make a little vignette. So I'm going to make an overlay layer. So I'm going to paint black and white into this just to get a little bit of extra, kind of dodging and burning almost. See, do I have that? Okay, I should put that under my layer there. So I'm going to pop his face just a little bit. I picked a little bit of white. I'm just going to see if I can expose up on his face just a touch. I'm going to do this. I'm going to pick a cool color. Let me turn off my grain because that's distorting my colors. So I'm going to pick kind of a nice cool color that seems to be sort of like the ones in the piece. All right. It's probably a little bit purpley. I overdid it just so I could see it. I don't love that. But let me see. I can always hue shift this. I think I want it to be a little bit less saturated and greener. Too strong, but I don't mind that. It kind of helps round out his face a little bit. Sort of turns the form a little bit more cylindrical. Um, sure. See what that did? Just helps him read a little bit better on the background. Gives it a little bit of that more moonlight kind of feeling. Let's see. And then I will use that same, I'm going to use a new layer so I can dial it in separately. I might merge these later. I'm going to vignette this a little bit. So a vignette is like a darkening of the edges of the frame. It looks like this, but less bad. What I'm going to do, I'm going to use the same grain cloud brush. I'm going to set this to overlay because I forgot to do that. I'm going to turn it way down. I don't want a whole lot of this, and it can distort colors a little bit, so I have to be very careful. But all I'm trying to do is get a little bit focused towards the center of the frame a little bit. I want the focal point to be near his face. So if I can darken the edges of frame a little bit, it helps me sort of bring the eye back to the face. And again, sort of just gives a little bit of shape to the image. I don't mind losing the lower part of him into darkness a little bit more. Let's see what that looks like. It's subtle. Let me crank it up just a little bit. See what that did? Cool. So I'm going to put these in an effects layer. I tend to like to do this because that way I can turn it off while I paint normally. Yeah. So this is kind of a nice thing. Like it's kind of like a post treatment almost. See that? So I can turn that on when I'm done, and then keep working in the meantime. Actually, I'm going to put this glow in there too, because that's not the kind of thing I want to have painting on. Okay. And the layers kind of, the order is sort of important on that. So, okay. I think I want to give him just a little bit of stubble, just a little bit of texture. So the bristle's great for that. I will pick kind of a darker bluish color. I'm just looking for a really subtle, just a little bit of a breakup. See that? I'm going to do the same on this side with a warm color. Cool. I'm going to pick out this cleft on his chin a little bit better. Too much, too much. So what I'm doing is I'm sort of picking the middle color. It's just a little strong, so I'm just going to keep doing that until I like. You know what? I think it's just too much. It's grabbing too much attention. Yeah, it's better without. So I'm going to merge this rendering layer down because I just want to blend some of this cheek stuff a little better. Where's that coming from? Is that my line? Okay. I'm going to do that just with paint then. I'm going to pick out this, maybe a highlight on his cheek, subtly. A little bit bluer. Too much. I'm going to do the same thing I did on the ear with a little bit of simultaneous contrast. So I'm going to cool it off, but I'm going to try to keep the value really close. Because I don't want to make too much of this, but I want to feel it. Can't tell if I like that or not. I'm trying to define the bag under his eye just a little bit. Let me get a different, I'm going to get gouache bristle. A little bit more subtle. Yeah, that's nice. It gave me a little bit of a turn. Kind of give me like an edge on my eyelid, which I like. Let me pick out a highlight on the eye. So that brush size discipline thing is something that it's kind of like pretending like you're working traditionally. It's like there's not just like an infinitely small brush that you could always pull out. So I try to keep things really I don't know what's the word, um, naturally sized. So I'm not like all of a sudden picking out a crazy detail where there shouldn't be one. But I think it's important to pick out eyes well. Otherwise, it just doesn't feel like you've focused. So I tend to make an exception. There are tricks actually to doing that traditionally, like using like dipping the back of the paintbrush in the paint blob a little bit, and so you get like a little bit of like I don't know, like a tip, like it kind of it looks like a Hershey's Kiss sort of, but upside down, hanging off the bottom of the brush if you just dip it in, and then you can like just dab a little blink in the eye or something. It's a nice trick. I took a painting workshop uh, at Watts Atelier in last fall, and it was really cool. And that was one of the tricks I picked up there. I like that a lot. Something about this knuckle is kind of bothering me. I'm going to make it more scoop shaped. I think that's going to work better. Just cleaning it up slightly. I don't really have a strong plan for what I want that to look like, but I think maybe a bit more of a scoop shape, kind of like the one that's on his chin, is going to be a little bit better. That's not bad. I'm try not to get too clean on the edges, but I think that feels a little bit more square, which is nice. And it kind of echoes this shape on his cheek. Play with that a little bit, actually. I'll warm this up slightly. I'm gonna go darker but warmer. I think that's nice. Just to help define that silhouette a little bit better. Yeah, that's cool. Something about that eyelid just isn't working for me. Not sure why. It's kind of just an aggressive. I like the idea of it kind of like semi-spherically popping out, but it's just not working. Not sure why. I think what I'm gonna try to do is cool it off, but keep the value kind of bright, relatively, and let the hue turn it. Yeah, that's better. I'm not gonna worry about defining the back edge of that too much. I'm gonna cut that contrast down. It's a little better. Still a little bit more defined than I kind of want it to be. I want it there, but it's like I can't decide how much I want. I'm gonna try this. Just gonna soften it down. That's better. That's better. There it is. Cool. Less of a super specific shape where you don't really need one, I think, you know. Cool. I'll do a couple more little highlight shapes. I might call this nearly done. Sort of trying to pick out some of these planes in here. He's so dark that like a little highlight helps a ton. Hmm. I still haven't figured out if I like the hands. It's a constant, like I've been kind of avoiding them this whole time. I don't hate them. There's something about them. They look less polished compared to him, which they are. But I don't know if that's a bad thing. This is just sort of the mentality that goes into all my paintings. It's sort of like, "Oh, I'll see about it later. I'll see if I can improve that as I go." I think as you work, it's like you have to sort of interrogate, like, is it working now? Is it working now? Is it working now? I don't think there's ever a point where you're like, oh, it's just perfect and done. I think like as the painting evolves, um, the uh, the goal line kind of moves, and so you can um, check in on things a couple times and realize that like what you might have liked before isn't working anymore. Like this little rim light is not working for me. I like some of the color changes in here. I think I could probably do more with it, honestly. Again, you can see I'm just like laying down color. I'm not really caring about the strokes a ton. I'm sort of just using it to blend with. There's a real danger of overworking to a certain point too. So it's like, you know, where do you stop? It's always that's kind of the constant problem, isn't it? The other the other thing as I look at this finger, I'm like, is I can't tell if I want to include that last knuckle or if I want it to be kind of overlapped. I think I sort of like it there. It's foreshortened and it's just like it's kind of that constant like how much detail is too much detail problem. If you put a little highlight, it looks like a fingertip with or like a fingernail without having to render fingernails, which can be creepy on cartoons.
Paul wants to know, working in the industry, do you often run into artists that you work with or work kind of closely with who use Procreate as any sort of main part in their workflow?
Um, it's I'm hearing people who use it for fun a lot. I haven't really heard like I've heard a bit. I think I know a lot of artists who use it for their personal work. Um, I I have used it for professional work. Um, Frankly, it's where my brushes are, so it's where I want to be. That's kind of the way I tend to think of it for myself. Um, I have heard of some of that. I think it's getting more common for sure. I think it'll keep getting more common as people start to get more familiar and like find the tools they like and the workflows that they enjoy. I think I bet we're going to see quite a lot more of it over time. Um, but I think it's also like the fact is uh, working in a network is probably restrictive in a way that's problematic for um, widespread use at a studio. But I'm imagining for me when I use it, I will tend to like export PSDs to finish in some cases, which is a feature that I love. So I think there's ways you can bridge that gap. I've done whole bits of concept art in it, so it's totally possible. I think it's more a matter of like people understanding that like kind of getting the idea out of their head more than anything else. I think it's sort of a self-imposed limit more than it is a technical one.
Mm. Definitely a learning curve with anything new.
Absolutely,
Um,
and it's so easy for people to. Um, sorry, I forget where I was going with that. I lost my thought.
all
I
good.
apologize. I apologize.
From our end, I guess it's kind of difficult to like it depends where you are in the industry and in the world, I guess, as to whether you run into people who use it commonly. But from our end, Paul, we see a lot of artists who use it full time for their workflow, and a lot of artists who use it for the majority of their workflow too, and then export to finish off in other programs.
Mhm.
So it's definitely becoming more and more common. Yeah,
I,
which
I
is
I
super
do
cool.
all of my personal work in it now, for real. Like I almost never touch another program at home except for like video editing and stuff. I'm gonna go for kind of like that spun metal, kind of like machined face on this a little bit. I don't want to get too detailed on this, but I think a couple highlights will help. Cool. Um, any questions about some of the choices I've made in this painting as I'm going?
People have just been enjoying it. And last time you asked if there were any questions and said, um, and there wasn't, they all jumped in with, no, we're just mesmerized. Because if we type, we'll miss out on something.
I guess I just get self-conscious. It's the silence of a stream that's kind of like a little odd. It feels like dead air, but I know it's not really dead air.
No.
So I'm picking some of these hot colors for these like transitions for these like core shadow or like sort of like contact shadow thing, so that's probably too much. But I don't want to lose that heat of the fire. I think that's one thing I'm responding to right now is I want to get some of this heat back in this transition. It's way too much. See how brown that is? It's kind of dead. It looks like you blended yellow over black, and it looks like paint more than it looks like light. If I can move it there, see how much more intense that looks, and it starts to become a light source again. I don't know. It's a thing that I find is really important if you're trying to describe um, light well. I think it's important to pay attention to the transitions if not almost as much, if not more so than the I don't know the main color. I think I think I'm actually too well. I think I'm a little too yellow on this. I tend to like reds. I think I gravitate towards redder colors anyway. It's too much. Um, what I'm doing here is I want to preserve some of the um, silhouette, so I'm going for a darker color actually than the rim light that was there, but it's richer, and I think that's working better. See what I mean? It's hard to. I suppose I could have done it better before and after, but let's see. It might be all on one layer. No, that's okay. So there, I haven't blended it yet, but you can see this looks a little bit gray, and this looks a little bit richer. What am I painting on? Oh, that's the watch. Okay. So now I can blend that out. Probably need to paint more. Yeah, I think the silhouette of this is kind of important. I like how clean it is, so I'm trying not to go too rendered on some of this stuff. I don't mind just doing a little bit of a color. Uh, Sort of just like a hue change more than a value change. I don't mind leaving it brushy too. I think that's nice. Just have to do the same on this side now. I don't mind light wrap, but I've got a layer for that now, so I'm just gonna do what I do here. Let's keep it simple. Darken this. I realize I'm like whispering because I feel like I'm just in an empty room. This is becoming ASMR, and I apologize. I mean, unless you're into it.
I feel like that sometimes with my streams, or my not my streams, my tutorials.
Yeah.
Kind of like, okay.
So I'm getting these kind of like desaturated transitions that I don't love. They're just a little bit dead, so I'm gonna um, paint into them just a little bit. Big broad strokes just to keep it loose. And I mentioned Sargent. If you look at John Singer Sargent, like again, not comparing himself, don't get me wrong, but he does tend to get these beautiful, like big, efficient strokes. And I know I'm layering over this a lot, so I'm sort of almost unworking this area, so it's not quite so um, analytical and overworked. I'm sort of trying to just simplify. I think it's a fine balancing act. It's just like you don't know when it's going to start to turn into something that like becomes just like a mashup of a ton of brush strokes. So that feels better. I know it doesn't quite feel like gouache anymore, but at some point, you just gotta let the painting do what the painting wants to do. I do try to like sort of work in the style of the medium that I've chosen, or the whatever it is you want to call these brushes. But if I'm working in gouache, I'm going to try to kind of work as if it's gouache. Soften that up a little bit. Yikes. So I'm always sort of thinking about the transition shapes here. I'm kind of going for those like scoopy, kind of sharp wrinkles. This looks charming. I think one thing I could do here is break up this fabric a bit in the lower left side. So I'm going to darken that just a touch. Maybe a little slightly bluer. It's subtle, but um, Tuxedos, especially in men's suits, generally have like canvas lining, so you're not going to get like a ton of wrinkling on the chest. So I don't want to go too wrinkled. I just want to break it up a little bit. Could use that down here actually. I'll reestablish the button. Okay. I'm not trying to do too much of that. I don't want it to dry your eye, but I think it's nice to finish it off. So let's see. Finishing touches. You know what I could do? I could do a little bit more debris, I think. Um, yeah, I'm just gonna do a couple touches as if there's stuff kind of like flying past him a little bit. But as you're looking at it now, that's pretty close to finished. So you can see what the post stuff is doing. Um, it looks kind of painterly, and then it just becomes a little bit more filmic when you get everything on. I just like that. Cool.
Someone reckons his watch should have said 0007.
Well, it's 0 because that was the countdown for the explosion.
Fair.
It's a fair point, though. That would be a good gag. But I never said it was him. Also, by the way, P.S. Okay, so I'm gonna put that here. This is gonna be the debris layer. I'm gonna make this. Maybe I'll make it a cool color. I'll probably work in one color and break up the colors as I go. But I think I sampled one of those red colors. Let's see. Let me turn this off real fast. I sampled one of these like darker red colors. I'm gonna swing the hue around so it's almost the same. A little less saturated, a little bit bluer, or a lot bluer. Let's pick an interesting brush. Detail, bristle. Actually gives you some nice weird edges sometimes. So I'm going to do that. So I'm going to try to like connect some lines to his body, I think. Without being too deliberate. It's not like he's getting hit or anything. I just want to like, it's almost like it's blowing dust off his shoulder in my mind. I'll probably minimize some of that, but I like what it's doing to help focus on him. But I also like them being cool because then it starts to separate them from like the the red stuff that's kind of more in the heat of it, and it just gives you a little bit more color breakup. It just kind of adds a bit of charm, you know. So I'm gonna come back and smudge on top of that with smudge. I keep using thrashed, but I like thrashed. I'll keep using it. It's nice and random, so I don't have to think too hard about what I'm doing. I'm going perpendicular to the stroke here to kind of like give it that little like broken up sort of trail, which is kind of fun. How do we feel about the color of that? It's not too distracting, I think.
I love it.
Cool. Let's see. Let me turn on all my effects. We can take a last look at this. Oh, you know one thing I could do? So here's a trick I do sometimes. I don't always do this, but I think this may call for it. I'm going to copy all and paste. So this copied a flattened version. I have my effects layer off, by the way. I'm just going to see if I can play with curves on this and see if I can, I don't know, just find something that is maybe just a little contrast here. I don't want to go overboard with this. I think a little bit is all it needs just to get a little bit more heat into that explosion. But I don't want to make it look like it's trying to be a photo. I do want it to look kind of like a painting. It's not bad. Might just be a little aggressive. I think it helps though. I'm gonna pull the green down just a little bit because I think it's maybe just a bit too yellow for me. I like the kind of red tone of it slightly. Actually, let's see. I'm gonna roll it off the top. See what that does? It kind of like pinkens the highlights a little bit. I don't know if that's a word, but I think it's. I just didn't want it to be quite so yellow. It's still quite yellow. I think it's just a personal color palette choice. I tend to like the sort of pinks and reds more than I like light yellows. I think it's just a thing that appeals to me. I think I like that. So now what I'm left with is just that really subtle variation. I know it's not much, but it's something I like. Cool. I think we did it. I guess the last thing would be to sign it, so I'll do that on top. I'll pick a color. Way too small. Cool. I will color correct that because I'm just that crazy. I just want it to kind of fade into the background, like make it nice and light, so it's kind of becomes part of the explosion. I'm gonna duplicate it because it's a little bit light. I'm actually gonna put it under my effects layer too. I don't know if I feel like I'm crazy for adjusting this quite so much, but it is important that it doesn't distract. Okay, there you go. I think we did it. Any last questions before we finish this off?
Nope, don't think so.
Okay.
Yeah, saving it from Instagram perhaps.
Fantastic. Yeah. Well, thank you guys. I will be joining the Q&A on Instagram. Please come up with some good questions. And it was fun streaming with you. I hope it wasn't too boring for you guys.
Not at all.
Okay. Well, thanks for having me, Georgie. I really appreciate it. It's so nice to stream for Procreate. I really it's an honor to help out the program that I enjoy so much.
Thanks for joining us.
All right. Thanks, guys. Catch you later.
All right.
Bye.
Cheers, guys.